Weekend.
Every day Saturday.
Forgot the glasses. I can't see without. I took them off so they wouldn't start. I didn't realize that until I tried to read. Oh, I'm sorry. I heard that. You can tell you're getting old. All right, more bets. I can read.
I was trying to find like Danielle, and she moved.
Well, we're in Ephesians, you need to say chapter 5. A little discombobulated Kelly running off like that. Just bear with me. We will ask the Lord to be with us this morning. Good. You guys come on in. Come on in, have a seat. Welcome. Glad you could make it.
We were here early, then we left, and nobody was here.
Yeah, what time were you here? Because we were here pretty early. We were here at
You got the
9:30.
white truck?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you and Pastor, you, still the ones here, so we left. Came back later.
Then we'll see you too.
What is that supposed to mean?
Apparently you're nobody.
I'm feeling love, huh?
Come on, Dennis, let's go.
Everybody's here now, so we'll leave.
Should I
Okay.
go to the altar?
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, well.
All right, let's ask the Lord to be with us this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today. We're just grateful for the blessings of life. We're grateful for everybody that's here today, Father. And we just ask that you touch them all with your Holy Spirit, Father. We just ask that you comfort those that are unable to be here today, Father, and that again, you would touch them with your Spirit as well, Father, and bring a peace to them and just a love and understanding. Father, I ask you to be with the Sunday school teachers in the back, the junior church leader, and Pastor Randy, as he delivers a message for our souls. And I just ask that you be with me. Allow your words to flow through my lips, Father. I'm just here an empty vessel. I just ask that you continue to use me. And I'm just thankful for the blessings you bring into my life. And I just am thankful for everybody here. And it's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Ephesians 5:1 and 2. We were in that, but we didn't get very far. Imagine that. This Ephesians 5, everybody calls it the marriage chapter. You know, it's going to be a while before we get to the marriage stuff, because there's a lot of stuff in here. You know, it's living as children of light is really the way this chapter is highlighted. You know, to remember we talked about in Ephesians 4, axios. You know, walking the walk, talking the talk. This is, going into more, what does it look like to be a child of light? And there's some real convicting things in here. There's some real strong, like I said last week, I think Paul was able to, through God, take all these heavenly things that Christ did in the first 3 chapters and boil them down and bring them into like what it's really like to relate to people, be it your husband, wife, boss, government, anything. He just brings it all down to real practical issues that still apply to this day. But it says, "Be ye therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also hath loved us, and hath given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling savor." Therefore, let me pick up where we left off. As we do imitate God, we become representatives of God, especially before those who have shut God out of their life. What are we sent into this world for? Is it not that we may keep men in mind of God, whom they are most anxious to forget? If we are imitators of God as dear children, they will be compelled to recollect that there is a God, for they will see his character reflected in ours. I have heard of an atheist who said he could not get over, or he could get over every argument except the example of his godly mother. He could never answer that. And that was Charles Spurgeon. If we were to walk in love, we need to speak the truth, show love, pray for people, and reprove sin. And we should benefit people's lives. We spoke on that a little bit last week. If you're going to do that, you should really benefit those around you. When we come to church, we should be a benefit to everybody here in one way or another. If it's simply just praying for somebody, that benefits their lives. Because we're asking God to intervene for them, that is a beneficial thing that, we're doing to represent Jesus Christ in their lives and in our lives. Walk in love as Christ also has loved us, as in all things Jesus is our example. As he has loved us and has given himself for us, we are display the same kind of self-giving love. An offering and a sacrifice. Jesus giving himself was obviously the sacrifice pleasing to the Father. We can also offer a pleasing sacrifice, a sweet-smelling aroma, as we give ourselves in the lives of others. And that he's talking about, sweet-smelling aroma, that a savor. Well, if we're being beneficial and walking in love and showing people love, that's a pleasing aroma to the heavens too, is it not? If we're benefiting other people, do you think that pleases those in heaven, in heavenly places? So that's a sweet-smelling aroma for us too, an offering. We often think we could lay down our lives in a dramatic way to show our loves for others. But God often calls us to lay down our life little by little in small coins instead of one large payment. But it is laying down our lives nonetheless. They're talking about sacrifice. We sacrifice things for other people all the time. The biggest thing that we always refer to is your children. A lot of times you give up things, your wants and desires for your kids. And it's a small sacrifice, but a lot of times, you give up time. Time is the biggest thing that we have, because once we spend it, we can't get it back. We can gain more money all the time. You can work extra hours, do whatever, get a side job, whatever you want to do to make more money. But when you give somebody your time, you can never get that back. And time is the most valuable thing we have. And we don't know how much of it we have.
That's right.
It can be over today. And so that's something, that we do. Adam Clark on an offering, an oblation, a Eucharistic offering, the same as a grain offering in Leviticus 2:1 and following, which is explained to be an offering made unto the Lord of fine flour with oil and frankincense. It means any offering by which gratitude was expressed for temporal blessings received from the bounty of God. It's give back, it's all God's. And what he gives you to bless you with, he expects you to share. He expects you to, if you have your time every day, we have time that we can give to people. And we should. Adam Clark on sacrifice, a sin offering, a victim of sin, the same as zebach, which is the Greek for that, which almost universally means a sacrificial act in which the blood of an animal was poured out as an atonement for sin. These terms may be justly considered as including every kind of sacrifice, offering, and oblation made to God on any account. Whatever we do, be it even fasting, that's a type of an offering. We just did that. That was a sacrifice to God. Back in the day, they did the blood offering, but it doesn't have to be that. We call taking up a collection an offering. We give that back to God. What he gives us, we give back to him.
Amen.
And it just goes to show it's a form of worship. It's a form of obedience to God. And then, it's funny. So he tells us to walk in this, and then we're going to go into the contrast of what it looks like walking in love in the next couple verses here. Ephesians 5:3-4. Let's look at that. And again, like I say, that this is a contrast. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be once named among you, as becometh saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are convenient, but rather giving of thanks. Now, it's funny, if he's going to talk about walking in love, the first thing that he's going to say about not walking in love is fornication. That's the first contrast of walking in love, fornication. And it's funny because fornication in the Bible is sin, but what does the world call it? Making love. But it's about the furthest thing from making love, because it's self-centered, it's self-serving. People, they don't care about the other person, they care about what they want, their desires. They're not interested in that. And it's funny that God uses that through Paul to show a contrast, black and white. Here's what it looks like to walk in love, here's what it's not. And he chooses that. And it's funny how in our society, like I said, they call it making love, and it proves only selfishness. It's just, it's something that, in contrast, you see that, and if you've lived any time at all, some of the most pain you've ever seen in somebody in their life is when they fool with that, outside of the covenant of God's design. Some of the biggest hurt that I've seen in people is when they've been hurt by when they think that they love somebody and they love them, and it turns out not to be the truth. And they've given a piece of themselves to that person, and it's just, it's really, really crushed their spirit and soul, because it's out of God's design. And that's one of the things that you can see, I think is why he chose that.
Are you stuck?
No, I just wish Kelly would get back. I'm uncomfortable with the boys here.
Yeah.
You want me to take him until she gets back?
I can take him back to the room.
Huh?
I can take him back.
Yeah. Why don't you guys go on back?
See you, bye.
This is hard. Some of these things. It's an adult Sunday school class, and there's times where it's 5 weeks, and you're there. I mean, it's written in the Bible, so you can't hide it. But
Right.
I don't.
You realize what they're hearing in school, though, right?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, I've already had this conversation with my daughter
Yeah.
a long
Good.
time ago.
I mean, that's the truth, and I don't know. The only one I know, James and Josh are hearing it. I don't know about Caleb. He seems pretty.
Yes, I was gonna say, I don't have any problem with James
He's a
hearing
little
it.
50-50.
He could stay.
Yeah, I kept looking at him, and I'm just like,
I
I
tried to
don't
have a
know.
conversation with
These
him.
two here, I feel like
you know,
they
we
could
had a
probably
little
tell
bit
me
of
a thing or two,
conversation.
probably.
I tried to have a conversation with Caleb, and he said, I don't want my head filled with that stuff right now.
Yeah.
So,
And that's what, one of the things that he's talking about, the filthiness and the foolish jesting and stuff like that. That's exactly true. I mean, you're jumping ahead of me a little bit, but how many people can remember songs when they were kids, or little sayings or whatever that you heard on the playground that were filthy?
and now, like, I'm an adult now, and I'm like, I can't believe that,
Yeah,
like, we were allowed to listen to that.
Yeah. And it's like, it's sort of like, this stuff's in our head, and how many years ago has it been? But every once in a while it'll flash past the radar screen. It's like, what is that? Why is that still there? And I think that's one of the points that he's trying to make of why you don't do that, because you're polluting somebody's mind. How long is it going to take? How long till it goes away? That's why he says, don't let it be named among you. Don't do it.
Never goes away. A little while ago you talked, I don't remember how long ago, I just remember that it's been relatively recent, that you talked about the spiritual battles that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the Bible talks about the battles that we can't see, where the demons and the angels are constantly fighting around us, because they're trying to get to us to take us away and make us, fall from grace. Which is why I've already had this conversation with JD, because I know that when she goes to her mother's house, because this has caused our divorce. I mean, my ex-wife fell in love with somebody else, and she left. So you know, this is, it continues to ripple forever. It's not like a pond where eventually, you know, the ripples go away. And we're talking, you know, 13 years later, I'm still having to deal with this. She has parental custody over there, and I know that she's getting her head filled with all this stuff because my ex-wife is a flaming liberal. You know, she wears all of the gay pride clothes and gets into all of this, and I'm sitting here trying, and now JD is saying that she has a boyfriend, but I remember 8th grade. I'm like, when's the last time you talked to him? She goes, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
So it's just
Yeah.
like, just to be able to say, I have a boyfriend and there's really no contact going on. Now I'm finding I have to step the game up even more because she doesn't come to church with me every time I come, and I'm trying to combat Satan on the other side, and so I don't like you, it's uncomfortable, but if I don't do it, who's gonna do it?
Right. Well, you see what society's doing, and that's one thing. You know, sometimes, you know, we're talking about fornication. You know, any perversion. You know, outside of God's plan for sex, and you know, and God's not prudent. I mean, He made us to have sex, you know, but in the confines of the marriage. I mean, He made our nerve endings where we have nerve endings. He made our desires where we have desires. But, you know, He made the opposite sex attract. But he said, use it in this confine. And if you don't, then you're perverting it. And sometimes in America right now, and I think throughout the world, sometimes we're a little relieved when it's just good old fashioned, red-blooded, American, you know, fornication. Because there's some really twisted things out there. But in God's eyes, that they're all, you know, the same. But sometimes in our minds, at least in my mind, I see some of this stuff on TV and I'm like, what in the world's going on? And especially the youth, I worry because you see it and it's just horrible. And you know, and sometimes we think, you know, we somewhat justify it. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's almost a relief when it's kind of normal, you know, to us, because we've been conditioned, again, the callous, you know, we've been desensitized in our society. But God says, use it outside of marriage, it's perverted, it's wrong, and it'll ruin. I'm telling you, the worst tears I've seen people cry and hurt that I've seen in people's eyes has been on a failed sexual relationship outside the confines of a marriage in my lifetime. And you guys can all ask yourself that yourselves. That I've seen it, you know, I know I've seen people lose people, and I see the pain there too. And to see the pain in their eyes and to feel it on them, because I'm kind of an empathetic person. I feel people a lot, and it's like it hurts, and God tells you. I think that's why He says don't do it outside of that, because it'll destroy. It robs your spirit, it robs your soul, because a piece of you is gone. And that's where He says, two flesh become one. And you give that away, and all of a sudden you're not whole anymore.
Everything that God has created,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that God's creation does has a purpose. Everything. And this is just one of those subject matters. And, you know, trying to tread on what I want to say here, because this is going to lead into my message for this morning, and I don't want to give that all away yet. But it's just pure selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you hear people say a lot of things. Like, you'll hear people say about something like that. You'll hear people say about, you know, when it comes to anything that they want to do, whether you're talking drinking, you talk marijuana, people say, well, God created it. If it's created, it's supposed. There's a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And we're taking the purpose that He has for it and making our own purpose, and that's why you see what happens, what you're talking about, because it's not being used in the purpose that God created it to be used.
Yeah. And it's just well, yeah, I hear you, and that is, you know, I got written down, making love only selfishness. They say I love you, but what they're really saying is I love me, not you. I don't care about you, only me. You know, if somebody's in that situation, a lot of times, you know, they don't care. You look at God's consequences for that stuff. You know, STDs. I was gonna research it and I never had a chance. I don't know what it is, but it's booming, you know. And some people it costs them their lives. That don't happen in marriage, you know. If two people meet and they fall in love and they get married and you know they have an active sexual relationship, there's no STD there. Why is that? Where does that come from? Is that a punishment? You know, that's what I see it as, because you know it spreads. So I mean,
that's what I told with me and Josh and I were talking. I said, and we were talking about that, and he said, well, that's God's way of, you know, punishing people for being gross about it.
I think it is. You
And
know?
I said, that's what I told him. I said, I think it is.
If it's not a punishment,
Right.
at
It's a
very
consequence.
any minute,
Yeah,
any
it's
it's
consequence.
because it's sinful, and we know
Mhm.
it's like when we talk about cancer and all the sicknesses. That stuff wasn't necessarily a punishment by God. It is what comes with sinfulness and putting sin into things.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's like the answer to a lot of people's question, how could God do this to me? He did it to yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's what I say a lot. You know, we have that great awful free will. Because it's great when somebody turns their life over to Christ and comes forward, but it's awful for somebody that has done that and loves somebody and to watch them walk the other way. It really hurts, and you're really scared for their soul. I mean, we're talking life and death. I mean, you know, and when they choose not to choose life, it hurts.
Amen.
It hurts. Go ahead, Howard.
You know, people say God created this and this. He created auctioning. Are you supposed to tap into that? Things God created are not for the human consumption.
No.
It's
Not a,
part of life. They use it in a lot of medicines and a lot of other
So-
things.
The
You
self-will
gotta
is a
know
perfect.
what is God's and what isn't
yeah,
for the human.
yeah.
He made us to populate this earth. Exactly what he did.
Yeah.
That was his sole purpose. Animals, humans, populate.
He put our nerve endings where he put our nerve endings,
Right.
you know, that's why sex is pleasurable, let's just be real, because, you know, he designed that. You know, but he designed it to be in the confounds of a marriage, between a
Amen.
husband and a
That's
wife.
right.
And,
You're supposed to have your, you're supposed to have your spirit and God's spirit intertwined. If you're not with God, you're outside of the confounds of God. That's all these other things you're playing with.
yeah,
That's where you get all the problems.
that's where, you know, we talked about in the introduction of this, that when Satan's going to attack, he's going to attack us, not what God did. Who am I going to?
Well, I was just going to say what's really sad is, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead, you're up.
as I see our grandson growing up, and I'm listening more to things like that in schools and
Mhm.
the doctors and everything, and they're promoting the vaccines to prevent it. You know, as long as you get this shot, it's okay, you're not gonna get it.
Are you talking about the HPV or whatever?
Yeah, and there's
Josh,
others
I had to
too,
get that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that sad? It's like, it's okay because you have your shot.
There's a contraceptive
Just
shot.
in case.
I mean, it lasts like 6 months that makes you not have to use anything else.
So
So,
these
I mean,
kids are
it's
so
just a
confused.
promotion of it.
It
As
is.
they
Well,
get
it's
older.
like
And-
acceptable for kids to be how they are now. It's not
Sexually,
acceptable.
well, like I say, you know, Satan twists things.
Yeah,
So, but if we take this word in the Bible, fornication, and then God says it's a sin, and we make it making love, and God's all about love. God is love, you know, right? There's play on words. Hold on, Nora, go ahead.
I have to say, I don't believe that the sins are diseases that you can't help, like cancer. You can't help getting cancer. That
Right.
is something that is in the world. It was not created by God. I don't believe that. It was just, it's something that's an environmental thing, and it attacks babies.
Mm-hmm.
It attacks babies. It attacks innocent little creatures that don't have no sin in them. So that I don't believe that like diseases like diabetes, a kid can't help that they got diabetes. It's just something that happens from the in that area, I don't believe that God created that to make it a consequence for something that somebody did that was bad. You
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I believe that.
That's not what he was saying.
No.
You gotta remember,
That's not what he was saying.
when man would disobey God, disobedience is what caused sin.
Mhm.
When God's disobedience, that cursed mankind, also the earth. He cursed the earth. We're living in a place
We're
that
living
is
in a
not conducive
fallen
to
world,
humans.
yeah. We are, and you know, and it's, you know, if we live outside of the will of God, you know, there's consequences for it. You know, you see it in lives of people all the time, you know, where it seems like they take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Why me? But yet they're constantly doing outside the will of God. And you see it, you know, you see it in your families, and it hurts.
Yeah,
But
sin doesn't just affect the person that sins.
no,
It affects
yeah.
all around us.
You look, and you guys will have to excuse me because I don't remember the book or whatever. But remember, I don't know if it was in Joshua or not, but God told him to go and attack a village, destroy everything in the village, right? You go and you destroy this village. I'm telling you, you go do it. You kill everything. You take nothing, no plunder, no nothing. You leave it all there, destroy it all. It's all mine. I want it all gone. And there was a person that took, if I remember right, they took a rope and they took some silver and they buried it under their tent in the ground. They hid it because they knew they weren't supposed to do it, but they hid it. And then they went to attack another city, and Joshua sent them out to go scout it out. Oh, we don't need our whole army. We just need a certain amount of men. They're real small, they're real weak, because it was Jericho, if I remember right, that they just conquered, which was mighty. You know, and they did it without losing a soldier. So then they sent them into this village to take it over, and they lost a lot of men because God was angry with them because they sinned. That's what the Bible says. It says they sinned. Their people sinned, but it was one man. But yet, I want to say it was 1,500. I can't remember the exact amount.
His tribe.
It was that they died. That many men didn't come back because one man sinned, because God punished them for what one man did. So if you think your sin doesn't affect others around you, just read. Because it does. And they ended up, God said, he told Joshua he was mad that they sinned against him, and he told him to go talk to him, and they went and they talked to him, and he admitted it, and they stoned him.
You know,
And then God was okay with it.
another example of that too, just to show that God is serious about this, is the flood.
Yeah.
He destroyed everything.
Yeah.
Not just man. Everything was corrupted by the touch of man. The foliage, the animals, everything had to go
Mm-hmm.
and start over again with what he permitted onto the ark. That's it. Everything else
Yes.
had to go because it was corrupted by man. Now, you have to, not every man was totally depraved. I'm sure there was all kinds of nice people who weren't serving God, but they were nice people.
Well, he
but
said
they're done.
only Noah was righteous. You know, that he
Yeah.
found Noah was righteous, but everybody else, he was done.
He was
But
done.
he found Noah was a righteous man. So, I mean, everybody else, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't really say about his family, but they got the pass with it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and, you know, he needed to destroy that.
Have to remember that what you just said about the whole thing with the burying and how the people
Mm-hmm.
confuse your relationship as to whether or not you're going to enter heaven or hell cannot be affected by other people's sin, but your life here can
Oh,
be
yeah.
affected by other. That's the example of that. What Mike's talking about. Those people that died, if they were because of that sin that group of people committed, if some of them would have been right with God, they made it to heaven.
Yes.
It's just that sin corrupted and affected everybody at one time.
Yeah.
Let's face the fact, Adam partook of a fruit. And it affects us.
everybody
Yeah,
else, that's right.
it does, you know, and God has mercy. I mean, you know, you look at Abraham when he was pleading, you know,
Look
for
at us.
Lot, you know, he was pleading for him, you know, and he kept like changing it. Well, what if it's this? Well, what if it's this? And what if it's this? Remember that? And then it's like, you know, he showed mercy on him. He really did. Because they were there, they were gonna take it out, and he changed. The same thing with, Nineveh, if I remember right, and Jonah, you know, he was gonna take them out, but they repented, and it said, I think it's the only place I've ever read in the Bible that God repented, and we talked about that in a
They were
class.
Gentiles.
Because, yeah, they were Gentiles, and he repented, he changed their mind, you know, is what that means, but, you know, I remember, did he really, or did they change, you know? He didn't change his mind, they were unrighteous, and they turned righteous, so he spared them. So God can't, you know, I mean, there's hope.
Sodom and Gomorrah at the bottom of the Dead Sea, that always comes to my mind when we're talking about the gay stuff.
Yeah.
You know, let them hear that story, that's
Well,
what God thinks of that sense.
Yeah, that, and then the two that they were, there's also the part, when they talk about that later on in the New Testament, where a part of that, God was mad at them because they weren't caring for the other people that were poor. They were cruel people, they were selfish. That was also part of his, you know, it wasn't just that. He was upset that they wouldn't take care of each other.
Whenever you think about the sins and paying for the sins you gotta go all the way back to the fall.
Yeah.
Women today still pay for the sins of Eve. Man today still pays for the sin of Adam.
Right?
And God spelled out exactly what it would affect every single one. And women, it's the pain of childbirth, and men, we have to work for the bread on our table.
Right?
You
And
know?
ultimately, death.
Right.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
Everybody experiences death now because of it.
Yeah, and that's one thing, you know, where it says, you know, through one man death entered the world, and through another man we have salvation.
Amen.
We just turn to him, you know. But moving on, let's get on with this lesson a little
That's
bit.
good.
Because we ain't done nothing yet. Absolutely nothing. Let it not even be named among you. Paul groups together these ideas of sexual sin and impropriety, indicating that none of these are fitting for saints and should not even be named among God's people. Paul used a comprehensive list of sexual sins. Fornication, porneia, a broad word describing sexual sins, and it's where we get our word porn from, pornography. Uncleanliness, another broad word for dirty moral behavior, especially in a sexual sense. Filthiness, which has much the same idea as uncleanliness. Coarse jesting, which has the idea of inappropriate, impure sexual humor. We must notice the theme of the moral appeal. It isn't avoid these things so you can be a saint. Rather, it's you are a saint, now live in a manner fitting for a saint. A constant moral appeal of the New Testament is simply this: be who you are in Jesus. You know, we have to rely on Jesus in that. And it's like we were talking about, you know, with the axiom, you know, our walk should measure our talk. You know, we should come, you know, if we come to church and confess to be a Christian, Monday through Saturday, we should also confess to be a Christian and live that way.
Amen.
That's what he's talking about. You know, you should be as a saint. As it is fitting for saints, the emphasis on sexual sin was appropriate. The culture for Paul's day and in the city of Ephesus, especially, was given over to sexual immorality. This sort of behavior, Paul says, is not fitting for saints, was pretty much completely approved of by the culture in this day and in our culture as well. Christians have ruined, you know, the Diana was the big statue in Ephesus, and it was in this day and age back then. It was normal for a man to have a wife to bear his children. It was normal for him to have a concubine in order to have, you know, fun with, to go out and have fun, you know, to get away from the house. And then to have a mistress just for pleasure. That was normal and accepted. You know, that's what they expected out of a man. You know, God, Jesus, when he came, he really set the stage for women and straightened a lot of things out. Because before that, women really, you know how you look at the way they treat women in the Middle East today, you know, like they have to walk behind whatever, you don't count, you can't vote, you don't have any rights, you know, whatever. And how a woman wants that in this society, I have no idea, but that's the way it was back then. Okay, that was just normal. Diana was, she was basically a sex goddess, and people worshipped her, and they went there, and there's like brothels. It was like a big wild party, and that's what they were. That's the way it was then. If you think our society is all new, it's not. This stuff has been going on for forever, and you know, and God's not pleased with it. Covetousness, foolish talking. Paul also included covetousness and fooling talking into the list because of their close association with sexual sin. Desire to have something that doesn't belong to us and foolish speaking have both led many people into sexual sin. Yet covetousness and foolish talking also have relevance beyond the relation to sexual sin. How many people do you know have ruined their family or whatever over covetousness? You know, they've let a hobby or a desire or something come over top of their family. They didn't take care of their family, or that might have been they had a financial goal, and I'm gonna be here, and they forgot about everything else but that. You know, it could be just a hobby. You know, I remember Mike gave up football there for a while because he felt like he was coveting football more than God, and that's the thing. You know, we've seen it happen to people. I'm not going into your message, but there is choices, you know, that you have to make, and you know, you're supposed to put God first.
That's right.
And you know, there's things that we have to look at for that. And foolish talking is literally an easy turn on speech. In the context, the idea is the one who can turn every conversation into a joking comment or on sexual matters, usually with a double meaning or suggestion. But rather giving of thanks. Positively, the Christian is to give thanks for sex. We receive it thankfully as a gift, and we enjoy sex in a way that glorifies the giver. God's purpose in giving sex is not primarily for the gratification of the individual, but for the bonding together of a husband and a wife in a one flesh relationship. Certain expressions of sexuality are sin, not because God wants to deprive some aspect of enjoyment, but because they work against his primary purpose for sex. Fornication is self-serving and destructive, and it is why Paul uses it in contrast to walking in love and being beneficial to others. That's what I believe the more I read about it. Because, you know, like we talked about a little while ago, you know, fornication is nothing but pure selfishness. Outside of the bonds of marriage, it's about what I want, you know, and not, you know, most everybody in here is married, but I think it was Charles Spurgeon. He said something along the effects of, you know, with women, men only have one thing on their mind when they're on the prowl, you know, when they're before marriage or whatever, they're looking to satisfy themselves. You know, and he says something about that nobody buys a pack of cigarettes or the carton after they smoke the cigarettes. So, you know, it's you're precious in God's eyes. You are his daughter, and we're his sons, and you know, you think things outside of the confines of marriage. If you were standing here with God, I got your daughter and I'm doing this and I love her, but you know, I don't feel like I need to be married. You're going to say that. That's what you're saying. You know, and you hear people say it's just a piece of paper. I've heard that a lot in my lifetime. It's just a piece of paper. But you know what? The Yellowstone National Park, I'll sell it to you. Sell it to you for a good price. You know? We don't need no contract, no piece of paper. Just give me your money. It's yours. You know? Or would you go buy a piece of property without a piece of paper? Would you go buy something, anything? Would you buy your motorcycle without a title? No. So it's anything that's important, you're going to have a contract. You're going to have something to represent that. And if you're taking a wife or a husband, you know, I speak as a guy, But you're going, if it's valuable to you, you want that in writing. You want that, well, one thing, it's a bond between you and her and God. You know, it's a covenant. You know, and it's an agreement between them, between the three of you. And without him there, you know, we're just not doing a good job of that with Christians. We see a lot of failures in that regard for us, and we just need to do better. But seriously, it's something that, you know, I think it's kind of ironic that Paul is able to take all these lofty things, like I say, boil them down to, this is walking in light, this is darkness. And what does he choose? I don't know which one of you two had your hand first.
The piece of paper thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible is very clear, and it was just last week or the week before, somewhere along, we were talking about how we are supposed to, as long as the laws and stuff are not outside of God's will, we're supposed to mind them.
Mm-hmm.
And my thing to that is, this is the law of our land now. Marriage, you get you get your certificate. This is how it becomes legal. But it's no, it is no different than the back when they did it years ago, and there was no piece of paper. God still had his law of marriage and how there's to be no divorce other than adultery, and even that's supposed to try to be worked out. And it doesn't change anything. It's just man's excuse again today to defy, because what they would be saying is, you know how you used to be able to have a verbal contract? You can kind of talking about it. Those same people that would say it's just about a piece of paper would be saying the same thing about that if it was just verbal as it was years ago. It's just an excuse to do what you want to do instead of following what God wants.
Yeah.
How for it to be done.
I want it my way. I want to be in charge, you know.
So, like, when I remember when I was studying the book of Genesis, and how it came about that a man and a woman would be married. And I look at the word married. When you take two different things and you put them together, we call that married. We're marrying two objects together. I mean, it doesn't even matter if we're talking about human beings or we're welding two pieces of metal together. We are marrying these two pieces together. And I remember thinking about how Abraham's son went into Sarah's tent with his woman and went in unto her. And they were married. The act of having sex in God's, in a glorious way, that was the bonding. They were then married together at that moment. And I remember my grandfather giving the lesson that if a woman is good enough for you to sleep with, she's good enough to marry. You need to think about that before you even think about having sex with her. Because if you have sex with her, you need to be married to her. And one of the things that when I was doing that study, I thought about how we commercialize marriage today. A lot of the things, like Randy was saying, we have to obey the government and whatnot. We have to pay these fees and all that. And some of these fees go to victims assistance programs for domestic violence. I don't know if anybody knows that, but when you're paying for your license in the state of Ohio anyway, you're putting money into a fund. I mean, and that's how they fund things. And I understand that that's how that all goes. But I think we have lost the significance of sex. We, like you said, it's commercialized. We have definitely diluted it to mean almost absolutely nothing. But if you read in the very beginning, the act, that was the bonding. That was the welding. Once you did that, you became one and you were inseparable.
That's what the Bible, later in the Bible it says too, two flesh become one.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right then and there. And because I've had this conversation, if you notice that, they said that they were married. Now, I'm sure there was a celebration afterwards, but there was not this big thing. That the woman, she was dressed for marriage as she was coming in on the cart, got off, went into the tent, and it was over. Yeah. There you go, we're married. There was no best man, maid, bride, there was no, you know, whatever it's called, the bachelor party and all that kind, there was
Oh,
none
no,
of that.
We made it into a big celebration, you know, but, you know, there was, you know, it was sort of an arranged marriage, you know. They wanted to keep it pure, you know. Didn't they go travel far away? Because
He sent the guy out to go find her and,
yeah.
and
And then
all
once,
that.
once
Yeah.
they did that, you know, then, yeah, you know, the Bible isn't clear if they had any kind of ceremony before, if it was just the act of sex. You know, it's not clear. That's
All I
what
know
it
is what it
says.
says is he went in unto her
Mhm.
and they were married.
Yeah,
That was nothing.
yeah.
That's simple.
They were often promised, by parents, even before they were born sometimes.
Yeah.
And, the bonding together was even, again, before birth. But once they were together, I mean, it was an official act.
Yeah.
Uh,
Changed.
No, there was no big ceremonies or anything. Two parents got together, and if I have a son and you have a daughter, they're gonna become.
I wonder how many people would stop having premarital sex if we said, okay, if you have sex, that's your bride or that's your husband for the rest of your life.
It's become so,
Yeah.
the kids nowadays, it really, I mean, you know, the terminology, I'm sure I'm not the only one that hears this stuff, booty calls. You ever hear booty calls before? You know, and it basically, we're just hooking up. There's no passion, there's no feeling.
That's what that means today, is hook up.
Yeah,
We're just hooking
it's
up.
just self-gratification and it's sin. Go ahead, James.
So you're talking about the piece of paper concept, and I hear that a lot. A guy that I work with got married a year ago, so they had the piece of paper and the tax benefit, is how he put it. But the problem with today's society is the whole try it before you buy it concept. You know, a lot of people do that. They live together for an X amount of time to decide if they can even stand that person for the rest of their life to even try and marry them. And I have 2 kids fresh out of college work in our department now, and one of them is currently going through that right now. He bought a house, right? He's got a house, he's buying a house so him and his girlfriend can live together to see if they can stand each other long enough to decide if they can get married. And so the older generation in there is sitting there looking at it, and he looks at me and goes, well, you understand it, you're our age. And I said, well, no. I said, you're looking at a guy that got married at the age of 20 and learned how to have intense fellowship through marriage. And that's the thing is we have, and it's encouraged. Families encourage that today. The world thinks that that's a great idea. Hey, try it before you buy it. And we put that on them and we encourage it. We say it's okay. When at that point, and I told him, I said, if you're going to do that, you might as well have that piece of paper you think is worthless, because at that point you're already married. Right. And people just don't understand that.
You know, and I'm gonna add this part, and I'm gonna put the preamble here. I'm not talking about all churches, but in this day and age, there are a vast majority of churches that don't do premarital counseling, and they will join in holy matrimony in God's sanctuary 2 people who aren't even Christians.
It's not right.
There are churches that do same-sex marriages in a sanctuary. So now, I'm not saying it's all churches, but we don't have too many leaders looking at these scriptures and saying, this is what it means to be married, and this is what you must meet before we marry you in this church. You know, so as much as I'm just saying it because there is a practical side of this where he said here, be ye therefore followers of God and as dear children and walk in love. He's telling us, okay, if you're going to follow me correctly. I want you to follow me, and it needs to look like this, because this is what I stand for. I stand for love and I stand for righteousness. And if we're going to do this, we need to do this correctly. And we as a church have said, we're going to loosen up the ropes here a little bit, and we're going to allow things that we shouldn't allow because we don't, for whatever reason. There's multiple reasons.
That's where society has changed. You know, like I said, you know, in making love. You know, and they look at, you know, if we're going to take God's stance on this. Well, you guys just you're bigoted. You're old fashioned. You don't understand. We understand people. We know people's love. You know, we're spreading love. You guys you're just bigoted, and you only see it one way. You know, well that's true, but
It's God's way.
yeah, we're gonna follow God's way. But you know, society has tried to flip this over on us. We're wrong because we want to follow God, where they have it figured out and they want to make exceptions. And you know, in your gay marriage, by a gay preacher, you know, and it's like that's just twisted. It's perverted. I don't know a better word for it. You know, it's a perverted society that we live in. And you see it, you look at, I don't know if it's Nickelodeon or what, but they have homosexuals in cartoons now. It's like, they're twisting it. And it's all about acceptance and love, and God's a loving God, and, you know, and you know, there's no consequences for my action, you know. It's,
Even so, come, Lord Jesus. It's
you
not
know,
gonna stop.
you see the travail getting closer and closer as he warns us. You know, that how many tornadoes have hit Ohio this year, how many national disasters are happening in California, which, mind you, they're very worldly minded there. You see these things happening in our life, in our society, and yet when we try to follow what God says, and yeah, we're kind of old-fashioned, and we see right for right and wrong for wrong. We're not a whole lot of gray. Try to keep it simple. Try to keep it straight. You know, and like I say, review this. If you don't believe what I'm saying, read and find out. Be Bereans, understand it. Doubt me, doubt Pastor Randy, whatever, but find out. You know, don't just take it at our word.
Right.
But society wants to put it on us as we're unacceptable. We don't accept their ways. Well, we're going to get into light and dark some next week. And we're not supposed to be in the dark. We're supposed to be the light. And if there is no light, then what's going to take over?
Darkness.
Hey, Dennis,
So we have to be the light.
I'll give you 10 seconds, okay?
I'll give you 10 seconds.
All right,
Go.
that's what I got that a little backwards. In the beginning was Adam. Then part of Adam was taken, made Eve. They were separated, right? Then God put them back together in marriage.
Yeah.
That's what marriage is.
Well,
Separation and put back together.
well, no, marriage is 2-1. You know, you look at Adam and Eve, like Mike was saying. You know, it's almost, well, yeah, he separated them and then brought them back. Okay, I'm with you there. But it was, you know, it was part of him. She was his rib, right? So, I mean, that is, you know, you're married together. There's two things, and two flesh become one. You know, I've thought of it that way. I've also thought of two flesh become one, because what do you do when you're married? Most people, you know, you have a child. And isn't that child the two you put together?
Yes.
That wasn't how it went.
It's
Because there was Adam. Adam became part of Eve. That was one person. God separated it.
yeah, and then
Put
they
them
put it
back
back
together.
together. Yeah, that's why I said I was with you after a second. It took me a second, but I
You know,
got
the Bible never says that Adam woke up after that. He made him to fall asleep, but he didn't say he ever woke up.
That explains it.